Okay, so everyone, let's start. I guess everyone has joined, and few people will join in the meantime. Josh, ready? We'll start. Works?
It's great.
Super. So hi everyone, and I hope you are having a very great day. So we are thrilled to kick off the first episode of Where's the Cookie, where we'll dive deep into the ever crumbling world of data privacy. And a very big thanks to everyone for joining. Your presence really makes this even better. And I hope you are ready to navigate this ever-changing landscape of user privacy, where we unlock the power to elevate the marketing strategy, right? So we'll unveil the secrets of CMPs from the impact on data collection. We'll cover that. We'll also cover the latest tricks of maximizing the user consent. So let's buckle up and let's get ready for the agenda, which shows up as like we'll first discuss about the consent mode V2 in 2024, what's happening. Then we'll also understand the implementing consent mode V2 correctly, what happens if we don't do, what's the right way, and also we'll understand how to improve the data quality. And followed up at the end, we'll also cover some Q&A where we'll understand what your current problem statements are, and we'll try to solve it for you, right? So that's what the agenda will look like. Let's start off with a quick introduction for Josh, which you all already know. So he's a seasoned analytics expert, and currently leverages over 10 years of experience in data architecture, CRO, and also instrumentation to empower the businesses. So currently he is serving as head of analytics and partner at FTF, which is From the Future. And prior to that, he also led a great big digital agency, which specialized in SEO, and he has also collaborated with numerous companies as well. So one more interesting thing about Josh is he's also an enthusiastic singer-songwriter. Unfortunately, I was not able to run his song, but we'll share the link with you later on so that you can enjoy that. So coming up to me, my name is Abhijeet, and I head the data analysis and insights team here at Tatwik. I also look after the CMP partnerships and other things at Tatwik, where I bring expertise in the MarTech solutions and also work on data visualization. One major thing that I like is prefer using CARE framework, which is collecting data, analyzing it, recommending, and also experimenting it. So I focus both on web and app analytics at Tatwik, and my team and I also work on latest cookie consent management and solutions, and also alternate tracking methods to ensure data collection remains robust and compliant. Before we start, I just wanted to understand, and I just wanted to help you understand that there's a lot of buzzwords around consent mode, cookies, and other things, right? So before we start that, I just directly jump on to the big topic, which is consent mode. What exactly it is, Josh will also pitch in there. And before I start, I just wanted to make sure that you understand what Google's consent mode. So consent mode was actually emerged as a crucial tool for the website owners and marketers, right, to understand and navigate the complex landscape of the user consent and data privacy regulations. So with the recent introduction of consent mode V2, there have been notable enhancements from V1. And in this webinar, we'll delve into consent mode V2, exploring how these updates may impact you. To start with, before I jump into some of the things, Josh, do you want to add on here?
Yeah, I mean, the consent mode as a concept has been around for a long time, and it really started getting a lot more complicated and present when Google said, that you needed to implement it by March of this year for it to remain compliant within certain regions, and they didn't do the best job of communicating what and where it was necessary, and therefore there was a lot of confusion around it, and it really made everybody pretty aware of that this was a thing that needed to be looked at. And that's really what changed, like the system itself. Yes, V2 was new, and there are additional features and functionalities, but the consent mode as a concept has been around for quite a while. So in V2, why is this all kind of, coming to a head right now, and where are we today with it, right? So obviously there has been significant shifts in privacy laws over the last few years, and it has really affected and threaten kind of Google's business model of using data to, optimize campaigns, and different regions have um, uh, uh, different compliance laws that kind of affect what you can and can't send, right? And so as Google wanted to essentially evolve with these laws, they created different ways to kind of navigate this landscape. And V2 is a really significant move towards its ability to navigate these compliance laws, right? And stay in compliance with them. There's also been kind of a cultural shift around data privacy, where people in this day and age care more, right? I think there was a kind of a black box around digital for a really long time, and people kind of accepted that they went on the internet and their data just went places. But as laws have been popping up, and leaders have been saying, no, that's you want to remain protected, and and fraudulent activities have occurred more and more as digital has evolved. There is just more of an interest in protecting yourself from a data perspective, right? And so these consent management and cookie banners and stuff have popped up, and laws have popped up in as a result of that. So there's definitely a lot of reasons why today this is all happening, and the shift in the landscape in general has changed.
Still, there is still people don't fail to opt for consent. Have you seen such kind of trend where people still feel that I don't want to do a consent management, I don't want that onto the website? Yeah. So what's your take on that?
I mean, I think it's different depending on where you are, right? There's a different relationship with privacy depending on what region you're in, right? If you are in Europe, you are going to the people are, one, going to expect it, and two, the laws are going to enforce it, right? In the US, it's not as strict, right? And other places throughout the world have varying levels of kind of the approach towards privacy. That's changing, right? We're seeing that shift in the US. We're seeing it shift all over the world towards a more privacy centric place. But I think one thing that is really important of what you just said is that a lot of companies are not are kind of consent weary, right? Because they, one, are afraid that they're going to lose their data, like all of their data. And then there's two, it's hard. Three, it's sometimes kind of intrusive and ugly, right? And a lot of that comes down to how was it implemented and the education around it, right? Because there's ways to make sure that, one, you're compliant without it being super duper intrusive for your users, and also setting it up the right way, you actually don't lose a ton, right? So obviously that depends on where you are regionally, but there's ways to kind of approach consent mode and consent management in general, where you're not just really losing your ability to conduct business, right? Or digital effectively.
Absolutely. One good point that you just mentioned about where the education, people are not that much aware that, or probably they think that implementing CMP is kind of difficult. There are multiple ways, which we are obviously going to talk about in the next few slides, but it's not that difficult. People should opt for it. because one thing is, by even if it's not by law, but understanding someone's privacy is something which we should respect and take it from there. So that is one point that would like to highlight. And coming on to the same point, I wanted to share some scenario which I recently faced. If you can share some highlight on that, where just imagine where there is a client who has a global presence across the globe. They have their presence in India region, they have their presence in US, they have their presence in UK, and they have one single website which operates across the globe, right? And that means if they have one single website, there are high chances that there would be a single implementation behind it. Like, for example, if I implement CMP by any means, by even if I do on the custom type side or onto the CMP by having some platform, there are high chances that if I implement it on US, it will get implemented into India region and also Europe region. And since their laws are different, that a user or the client might feel that I don't want to lose out the users from US because of the consent mode implementation. And but since in Europe, it's very important. So how do we take that? Is it possible? Is it something that we should focus on, or is it something that we should take it out? How do we get that thing done? If you can share some thoughts on that.
Yeah. So a solid and good consent management platform takes care of all of that, right? So like one of the features of consent management platforms is they are constantly tracking what is compliant in these different regions and what you need to what is necessary to implement via these different regions, right? And a setup in the US is going to be very different than a setup in Europe, right? Because Europe has an opt-in policy where somebody has to opt in, to be tracked technically, right? And US has an opt-out policy where you have to give, sometimes you don't even really need that right now, but if you wanted to, you could set up a consent management platform and set it to opt out so they would be tracked when they first arrive. And that's all based off of signals that the consent management platform is sending downstream to the tag management platform. And the tag management platform is listening to those signals and making decisions on when and where to show tags based off of that geolocation of that user. So it is not true that you have to set it one for all, right? Because you're setting something up in Europe doesn't mean that it has to be that way in US. And that's a common misconception of, oh my God, I don't want to put a consent management platform because I want, to track users when eligible, right? And I don't want this to be for everyone, but it's really important to have, and we'll talk about this down the road, a good consent management platform because that's really up to the consent management platform to determine in its settings, obviously. Yeah,
absolutely. So that actually makes it on to the next point, where which you just mentioned, right? That there has been a lot of new things which have came up from V1 to V2, and there have been a lot of new things which have came up. Right. So I just wanted to rewind it to the consent mode V1, which was the beta version, which was actually focused on the fundamentals of storage consent, right? So it actually, which I remember, it used to work as like there were two cookies of ad storage and analytics storage, which actually ad storage used to control the storage of data used for the advertising purpose, like cookies on the website or maybe device identifiers in the apps. And analytics storage was governed by the storage of data for web analytics, right? Such as, for example, if I remember, it's visit duration, right? But now in V2, where we just have to hold on to our ads, and V2 expands with the ad personalization options as well, right? Like, for example, you are ready to work on the ad user data and the ad personalization. So coming on to that, do you think the consent mode V2 is a big deal now in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, it's there is a number of reasons why V2 happened, and one, it was to give users more control over what was sent, which is really important that, kind of Google is giving you back control onto how these tags, specifically Google tags, but all tags really are, really sending downstream information to these platforms. Whether you are, allowing them to fire when based off the configuration. But what V2 really introduced is this concept of modeling behavior in cookieless pings, where it can still send certain data downstream to Google if certain variables are found within the these different kind of variables that you mentioned right now, which are the the personalization variables. Yeah. So there's definitely more functionality in how the information gets translated from from the tag management system downstream to the Google products in this V2. But one of the reasons that they push so hard around this V2 is to make it aware that here is this cookie management part of or here is this cookie management part of Google Tag Manager that is really integrated and well integrated into consent management platforms, right? So these things now work together much better than before, right? And they rolled out consent overview, all of these different consent tools into Google Tag Manager to really help users understand if consent mode is or is not implemented. And you'll also see that in each one of their products too, where there's here's consent, have you set it, right? And all of this was part of that kind of launch around, look, we're getting serious about consent now. You have to do it if you want to continue to advertise, specifically in Europe, but there's reasons to do this all over.
Absolutely. So if I just simple it up, like for example, if we target users in the Europe, right, and consent mode now acts as your shield against the non-compliance with the regulations like GDPR, right? So by implementing it effectively, we actually demonstrate respect for user privacy, and we also ensure that the optimal campaign is also is on to the utmost performance, right? So this was, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and it's a balance, right? Because you want to continue to optimize your advertising effectively, but you also want to respect privacy. And V2 was the solution for that from Google. So, there is definitely a value in trying to do both of those things.
I agree. That is so right. So since we have talked a lot about why it is important, what are the scenarios, what has happened, right? I guess we should just talk about like how to implement consent mode V2, right? Is there a right way to do it? And how to also make sure that the implementation is done correctly. Do you want to add on a few things on that?
Yeah. So there's two different ways to implement consent mode V2. There's a basic mode and an advanced mode. The out of the box, if you were to just set up your consent settings without changing anything, one thing that is not very well explained by Google, or it doesn't have a lot of information around it, is what is basic mode and what is advanced mode based off of the actual settings that you put, right? And when you look at the screenshot here, you see this thing that says add, built-in consents, right? And you would kind of assume that what that meant is that this is what it's listening for. It won't fire unless it sees these things, right? But that's not what it's doing. It's actually just modifying the tag based off of if this information is there or not, right? And how it modifies the tag is that it sends signals over based off of what it sees in that tag, right? And those signals can be used for modeling, right? if you don't set anything, and you're just, setting everything to not set there, it's just going to use those built-in consents and it's going to run advanced mode, right? And that's kind of the out of the box not set settings. If you don't want it to fire at all until somebody actually explicitly gives consent, you need to set up basic mode, which was that third setting that I showed there, which is you require additional consent for these things to fire, right? And that's where you can add certain things like, analytics storage needs to be present for analytics to fire, right? And this would ensure that those cookie list pings are not happening before user consents or they deny consent, because that actually occurs right now. And a lot of people don't realize that is that in the advanced mode, even if they click deny, even if they have not explicitly consented yet, Google is still sending information over with cookie list pings without being able to essentially identify that user, but for the data itself, those action itself, to be modeled into its broader kind of, data system.
Absolutely. And we also have an option to debug with the Google Tag Assistant, right?
Yeah, you can debug it with the Google Tag Assistant. One thing so Google has provided a bunch of tools. The way that these tools work with the consent management system is the consent management system takes care of, basically setting all of the rules of around, what somebody consented to and what they didn't consent to, right? And those are oftentimes assigned to values like numbers, right? And those numbers and variables that are, yes or no, based off of the different settings, are being passed downstream to Google Tag Manager. And so it's important for, a consent management platform to be the first thing that happens in, the Google Tag Manager world, right? So there's this, trigger called consent initialization, and that is where you put your consent management platform settings, essentially, right? Your tag. That then passes information downstream, and Tag Manager needs to listen to that information and make decisions based off of what settings are being communicated downstream. And that's oftentimes where people get this stuff wrong, is because they haven't set up the Google Tag Manager portion of it. They just assume that the cookie management platform does everything and all the work, right? All of these things have to listen and work together to create a compliant system, which is hard. And that's why a lot of companies are struggling with, this kind of implementation, is because all of these things are really complicated to get to work right. But it's also the only thing that's protecting from, compliance, protecting in relationship to being compliant.
Absolutely. I agree to that. And to add on to it, we also had faced a similar kind of situation where the consent mode was implemented, the data was also flowing, but the quick audit, right, if the implementation is correct or not, and without debugging, we'll not be able to understand what exactly the requirement was and how do we solve for it. So quick audit of the implementation also is an equally important part, where we have to understand that even if after the implementation, whatever method you choose, it has to be perfect, and we have to also understand the data has to be correct. Whatever that we are trying to capture is onto the point. So these are I've just added few screenshots for everyone to understand. We'll also share the deck with you so that you just understand how the debug happens with the Google Tag Assistant. And while we were speaking a lot, just wanted to give a quick surprise. I understand that you might have a lot of questions in your mind where you wanted to speak with someone on how this consent mode implementation happens, if there are any ongoing issues that you have, maybe on GA4, on consent mode implementation. These are just a quick takeaways by Josh on top 10 tips on how to use GA4 for the e-commerce brands that will be sent to your inbox. And from our end, it will be a quick free audit of the consent mode implementation for the first 10 responses. Feel free to tag us, feel free to let us know. We'll give you a quick free audit on that. And you'll obviously receive a top 10 tips on how to use GA4 by Josh. Right. So moving on to this, it was just a breather for everyone so that we know that what's going on to the next. So before I jump onto this, one thing I wanted to understand, Josh, what is actually a better way to enable consent mode V2? I understand there are two ways. One is directly doing it on the website, that is via custom method, or with the CMP. I personally feel CMP is the one that we should implement that actually solves the first problem that I mentioned, which is, for example, if you have a global presence, you have some implementation in US, you have some implementation in Europe, custom, and you also have to be updated every time. CMP, I feel, is a better option to do this, but just wanted to understand your thoughts and so that we know what exactly happening as of now.
So my stance is it's an absolutely better business decision, even though it might cost a little bit more, right, to go for a CMP. And the reason is privacy laws are not set in stone at all, right? And we're seeing them evolve faster than we have ever seen them in the past around digital, right? New laws are coming up all the time and being passed all the time. We're seeing current laws change as well. And if you implement a custom solution, which is possible from a technical perspective, you might be compliant today, which is fine. But then you have to every single month figure out if there's a change that has happened. And CMP businesses, that's literally all they do is basically stay up to date with privacy, change their systems to comply with the most, updated versions of these laws, track these different regions and how those are changing and evolving. And if you want to save time and headache and ultimately money in the future, going with a CMP is going to do that over doing something custom, which is like basically a duct tape fix, right? It's like you can, duct tape something to your wall, but eventually it's going to fall down if you don't actually fix your wall, right? So
yeah. So CMP stands as one of the trusted tool where there are multiple Google certified or Google's preferred partners on implementing CMP. So Karthik also has a strategic partnership with User-Centrics, and there are multiple other platforms as well. But a definite solution where if you want to do a customer consent management thing, something on CMP tool is somewhere we should look after, right? So I understand there could be multiple things that might come into your mind on how the data will look like. Do I have to compromise on the data quality? So one thing that I wanted to share here is I understand that you might see less of the data, but there are obviously ways of how you can monitor the data quality, right? So after any correct implementation, my next part was, is there any way to check if I could actually improve my data quality? So according to me, Josh, you can also comment on it, but according to me, data quality actually can be improved. There are certain ways which I believe can be really helpful. First is we monitor the CMP data, like we can understand and look at the consent rates, drop-off points, and also to see if there can be a user segmentation and see for better insights. Another could be checking the data hygiene and also some advanced techniques. For example, we can consider data profiling and matching for the deeper analysis. And one major thing which I feel is staying vigilant, like we can regularly monitor and collaborate to keep the data quality high. What are your thoughts on this? And if you want to highlight something on leveraging Google's modeling capabilities.
yeah, so like you said, there's a direct relationship now between the CMP and the analytics tool. So if you are seeing a significant amount of people drop off your analytics tool, but you see 5% of people opt out, right? That means that something's not configured correctly, right? Because there's really a lot of gut checks that you can do to just make sure that you're not seeing a significant bump or dip with how the setup has been implemented, right? And a lot of times people are so scared because they see this huge drop off, but then they find out that they've implemented something wrong, and that's what's causing it, right? Because again, these things all have to speak to each other, and oftentimes you get this variable wrong, and then all of a sudden you're seeing a ton of drop off, and you're like, oh my god, consent mode really messed my stuff up, and it's the wrong assumption, because that's all based off of that. So assuming that you have everything set up correctly, there's oftentimes there's a correlation between people who are actually accepting cookies on the website and the quality of that data that they're providing you, right? They're actively interested oftentimes in the product. They're moving around the website a lot more oftentimes, right? And there's also ways to implement the cookie banner that are not as likely for that person to just opt out. For instance, if you have just a reject all button, and then like your opt-ins are hidden behind that wall, you're going to see a ton of drop off, right? So there's the combination of like making it a good user experience for and providing those options to set a baseline for people to potentially opt in or opt out, right? And then once the data starts collecting, if you are using the modeling mode, it will model on top of the data that's there. You just have to be careful of doing this with a site that does not have enough information and data, because it can really throw things off if it's taking a very small amount of a data set and creating modeling off of it, right? So if you are going to be using kind of the advanced mode, it is going to try to compensate for some of that data that you're losing. You just want to take that with a grain of salt, and you can also gut check that what's being modeled in each one of these platforms with some of the tools that Google provides. So that's one way to do it. And the other way to do it is, if you're just using basic mode, you can use other techniques like first-party data collection to really gather data in a sophisticated way, and leverage that data in ways that you have not been able to do in the past. I think like people got pretty lazy around data tracking, and they try to track everything, but they're not going to use 90% of that, right? And so now you have to think a little bit more about what you do want to collect, what is being collected, how are you going to use that? And you can create sophisticated strategies around how to use that data. And then ultimately that will help your business a lot more than tracking everything at once, right? So there's definitely, ways to approach this where you're not just losing all of your advertising efforts because you are, asking people for their consent, which you should be doing anyway in an ethical world.
Yeah. So I've seen some instances where people actually do track this much, but they actually use a little of it. So I totally understand and reciprocate that as well. So that was about. So that's what the future actually is looking like. I believe the less is going to be more, right? And less is more, and understand that less user data actually due to the CMPs can, I believe, hurt the model accuracy as well. But I believe that we do have a solution on that, which you just mentioned, which when we just discussed is about the consent-based modeling, right? So we can get a user buying data and can use that into modeling. We can also have a data prediction models, which we can surely build on top of it by using the existing data and predict user consent behavior, and effectively also be able to improve the CMP effectiveness, right? So that actually becomes a win-win for both the marketeers and also by respecting the privacy of the users who come on the website or app. And we can actually optimize the data strategy with CMPs and also do a quick, smart modeling. So any thoughts on this, Josh, before we start on with the Q&A?
I mean, what we're going to see is, now that AI is being kind of built into all of these data models, GA4, different, Google Ads, we're going to see a lot more of leveraging the data that it gets to create, to throw kind of AI on top of that and build, predictions, build, the ability to leverage that data in ways that we have not been able to do before, right? And there's going to be an element of black box trust in how some of this it's using some of this data, and it's really important to have clean and valuable data being put into the system, because that's how it's going to learn. And the better your analytics system is set up, the more valuable that data will be to the AI. And then ultimately, it's going to be able to leverage some of that, what it's learning to, build that modeling. And it's also going to, leverage that modeling for advertising purposes as well. So we're going to see a lot more of that. And that will ultimately get us, what we didn't have before.
Yeah. Focused learning for AI would be the next thing then. So they'll be able to more learn better and try to deliver better outputs. So that is something which I believe and I understand. Thanks, Josh. Let's jump on to some Q&As then. Works?
So I saw one above that said that US has an opt-out policy. However, I have found that CCPA has been revised to where it requires users to opt in, like the GDPR. Would you please confirm that? I have not heard that. If you go onto the CCPA website today, it's still an opt-out policy. There are some legislation changes that are brewing around that changes kind of the opt-in consent age from 16 to 18. So there's basically they're making some changes around legislation around age requirements for data sharing. But from at least from what I have seen up to now, I have not heard that there has been a significant shift from opt-out to opt-in with CCPA.
Yeah, Josh, you can. I understand. You can jump on the next one then.
Say that again.
Yeah, you can continue. We can just jump on to the next one.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just looking through here. So in implementation part, how URL pass-through work, does it help to drive the correct campaign or attributes? I might need a little bit more clarification around what you're asking. In terms of, how if you look at the requests that are going out to these systems, they are communicating a certain variable to these different platforms on what type of consent has been set. So whether it's advanced or whether it can use modeling or not. And that's basically determining how they are how the system is allowed to use the data that's coming through it. So if it's and if consent has been set up at all or not.
So the next question I see is, what's the basic difference between V1 and V2? Actually, it was covered, but I'll just mention about the two focus points there. So actually, V1 focused on the ad storage and analytics storage. So ad storage was actually controlled the storage of data, which was used for advertising purpose, like cookies on websites. And there was another one, which is the analytics storage. But V2 has an additional one there. It expands it for the ad personalization options as well, which is more focused on ad user data, which actually grants consent for sending user data to Google for online advertising. And we also have an option of ad personalization, which unlocks the potential for the personalized advertising experience, right? Like you can be enabled for remarketing campaigns, and also it will help you build the audiences for there. So that is the basic difference between V1 and V2. Coming on to, I hope I was able to answer you there. Coming on to the next one is, how does consent mode V2 interact with other tracking technologies or methodologies commonly used in marketing analytics, such as first-party cookies or server-side tracking? Josh, do you want to take that up?
Yeah, so all of these things should work together. Basically, when you are it doesn't matter if it's a first-party cookie or a third-party cookie. A good consent management system should be able to control all of those that are being set on your website. Oftentimes, they are being set to different types of trackers in your consent management tool. So, oftentimes the first party cookies are set to a functionality or a performance trackers. And then like third party cookies, or anything that's kind of sending signals out to other platforms beyond your own website are set to advertising cookies. And then all of that kind of gets managed by your consent management platform, which then gets passed downstream to Google Tag Manager, and it will set those cookies if somebody's opted in, right? Or it won't if somebody's opted out of those particular groups and categories, right? So first party cookies and the cookie part of that is all being kind of handled by the consent mode and the cookie management platform or consent management platform. In terms of server-side tracking, technically, if you have server-side tracking set up in GTM, you can set it so that it passes those signals also downstream to your server-side tagging setup, so that this would adhere to essentially the rules that you're already setting up for in Tag Manager. Now, sometimes people have server-side tracking through their website or not through a tag management system, and then it gets a lot more complicated in terms of how all of this is working together, right? So, my strong suggestion would be to have server-side tracking set up within server-side GTM if you're already using GTM client-side for your consent mode, and have everything kind of work together. Technically, it's server-side tracking is communicating information oftentimes without certain cookies involved. And so, it's kind of a different beast in a lot of ways, but if somebody's consenting to being tracked for certain types of activity, you definitely want to respect their choices regardless of the means of the information that is going out, right? Or how that tracking was set up. So, it's definitely valuable to have all of these things kind of work in the same body of how it's moving and grooving, and that's all kind of determined by that top layer of consent management system.
Thanks for elaborating it, Josh. The next is, are there any particular industries or types of websites that may face unique challenges or opportunities when adopting consent mode V2 for tracking data accuracy? So I would say there are no particular industries or types of websites, but everyone should adopt for consent mode V2 and have a better understanding of the data, respect the user privacy over there. And however, there is always an option of what you give an options of what needs to be tracked, what doesn't need to be tracked. Could be unique challenges, as we just discussed. The challenges could be, you might feel there's a dip in the data, there is a less user data. But as of this scenario that we are having, and the laws are something which we need to take care of, having a CMP in place and consent mode in place will actually respect the user privacy. And also challenges is where the data is something which gets dipped on a later stage, but you always have an option to come up through it. There could be an option of modeling of data, There could be an option of how you monitor the data, understand where exactly the gap is. Is it just because of the CMP? We understand and monitor the data so that you can come up with some solutions to it. There could be some challenges, but there are always ways of how we can make sure that we come from it. So that's my POV over there. I hope Josh is also aligned. I'll jump on to the next one. Post implementation of consent mode v2, hard coded by handling the storages within one trust, I could see a traffic shift which is contradictory with first user versus traffic acquisition. Helpful if you can say on the impacts, watch outs to be done post implementation. So I'll just add on to what maybe Josh can add more onto it. But yes, and I feel that the scenario that you have mentioned is right. There can be some discrepancies in traffic data after implementing consent mode v2, and the impact could be, as I just mentioned on the previous question, the impact here could be a traffic drop. What you need to watch out is there should not be any data loss, but there would be. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have lost the traffic. But rather than a GA4, probably we make sure that the GA4 tracks everything correctly. Another option here is the modeling accuracy, and you can also do a comparison there, what exactly is happening. The recommendation here is you segment the data, you focus on the trends and see if there could be anything alternative that can be there. We can explore some alternate tools as well, which but I have to make sure that the user privacy remains the same. We don't need to compromise on that. That is something which is one of the major feature and the major focus area of what CMP is looking after. Josh, do you want to add on to something?
Yeah, that like what you said is exactly correct. You might see some fluctuations of what's being assigned credit because certain data will shift around what it's using, especially if you've done advanced mode, because it's going to take certain information and model it and inflate it based off of the information that's available, and so you might see some historical shifts that way that will change. However, that will become a new baseline and you can use that as a baseline, right? It's just, you're unfortunately or fortunately in 2024, data is changing and how we use it is changing and what we're asking of users are changing. And a way to kind of make sure that you get as much accurate actionable data as possible is to leverage first party data techniques. Ask people where where they heard of you, get more information around what characteristics a user has, right? And take some of the data that you are getting with a grain of salt if you are modeling it. If you're not modeling it and you're just relying on basic mode, then you might see a somewhat of a drop off in certain areas, but directionally it should be similar.
Thanks for that info, Josh. I'll take one more there. Here is a use case is shared by Neat. User landing with source medium and not accepting consent on first page. User navigate to next page where source medium params are not available in URLs and accept the consent on that page. This leads to correct attribution if ? And if not, how correct attributions can be driven with consent mode v2. So Neat, I understand. So here I believe you're right there. So it might, I understand, I feel it might lead to an incorrect attribution because the consent on the second page, consent is on the second page. And since the user actually didn't consent on the landing page, GA4, if we are looking at GA4, it wouldn't have stored that information. How do you correct that? There are ways of how you can do it. One way is what I feel is having a UTM parameters dipped over there. And we can also rely on the first party data. So if you have UTM parameters, you can make consistent use of in all the marketing links and everything, and which includes also those leading to deeper pages within your website. So from landing to other pages, have that consent, have that streak maintained, and this actually can help maintain some source medium information even if consent is delayed over there, right? And additionally, you can also look at some advanced CMV2 modeling and also track the user journey analysis and try to understand if that can be solved. So I believe there is no right solution in for those scenarios where delayed consent and there's a missing data, but we can obviously have some strategies planned. If there are very detailed questions and you would like to answer that, let's connect and we'll surely help you out with that. But I hope I have answered majority of what you are looking for. If not, then maybe we can connect and discuss it in more details. But Josh, you want to add on something?
I mean, it just, there's a couple of what you were saying is exactly right? Like if somebody comes in on the first page and then they go to the second page, a lot of that information could be wiped unless you're storing it somewhere. And then, ultimately you could take that information in Tag Manager and then input it into that person's, data through that, right? Or make custom dimensions that are storing that data, right? But it's more complicated. And if one way that you can kind of get around that is to make your cookie banner relatively present, right? I've seen companies who, will put their cookie banner very, very small on the side of their page and, hope that somebody will click into it and accept cookies or not, right? And that is going to have a lot more of an impact on people clicking it potentially on their first page or not clicking it at all than, a big pop-up that happens that says, please, accept cookies that, when somebody first gets to your website, right? And, it's kind of forcing that action to happen. And people shy away from, making it aggressive because they don't want to inconvenience their users or they want to have people have a good experience when they get there right away. But you're kind of sacrificing potential data quality by doing that. So, there's definitely different ways to approach it from a UX perspective to minimize the chance that that scenario happens.
Absolutely. Thanks, Josh. Two more questions from there. The first one goes as, could you provide some insights on whether utilizing consent mode within GTM alongside a consent management platform like OneTrust enhances custom management effectiveness, particularly considering the option to toggle on consent mode 2 directly within OneTrust platform? So I assume that you are looking for, the question is around if we can combine the consent mode and within GTM alongside a CMP like OneTrust, right? So there are breakdowns if you are looking for understand the benefits of combining CM and the CMP. So yes, there are particular benefits of what can happen if you combine both these two. So the first one goes as what I can see is having a granular consent control, because OneTrust acts as the central hub for collecting the user consent choices, right? And also you can have a simplified management. It becomes very easier to manage it, and you don't need to have complex tag configurations, right? And obviously you can improve some maybe user experiences, and also it becomes privacy compliant. I hope I'm able to directly get into what exactly you're looking for. But if there are some others, if I'm not getting it right, would like to connect more on this. More detailed information would be required to help you out and understand the question better. But overall, if I understand, combining the consent mode and the platform, it offers a robust and user-free solution for the consent management. And OneTrust has a specific integration further to this, which actually enhances by simplifying setup, and maybe you can automate the data flow. That's one thing. Another one is, will you be sharing the deck with the attendees? Yes, will do. Thanks for asking that. Last question. I have implemented CMP on my website and my analytics data has dipped. I have implemented consent mode V2 in basic form. Now I am considering changing it to advanced mode, but Google says that modeling data is only available when page has minimal number of visits and my page doesn't have that much. What should I do to have more data? Josh, would you like to take that up?
I mean, yeah, it's a very loaded question. One of the first question I would ask is it implemented right? Oftentimes when you see a humongous drop off of data, you really want to ask that question first, right? Because and there's ways to check that, right? You want to check your tag management, make sure that things are firing when people opt in. You want to make sure that it's still firing, especially like unless you're in the European region, you want to make sure that it's firing before somebody potentially opts in, right? If that's kind of how you've set up your system, and that's compliant to your area. And then, you can also gut check it, like I said before, against what your CMP is saying about how many people have opted out, right? If that number is way different than the data loss that you have in your analytics system, then you really want to check the configuration. Now, say all of that is correct and you are rocking and rolling with the setup. You don't have a significant amount of options around how much data is essentially being stored on that page, but you do have options on what data is being stored, right? And that is, again, you can get into strategies around getting more valuable data from the people who are coming there and who are opted in, right? Around, what events are being tracked, what are they doing on that page? What are you going to be using that data for? What other information can you get about that user on that page? So for instance, any type of quiz or something that you're asking the user to actually submit information about themselves. So there's techniques you can get to get more data and then use that data more effectively with like the better quality of that data. So, you can't magically just turn on, more data from, people who have opted out. But you can, get more valuable data out of the people who are opted in.
Absolutely. Josh, I was just looking at these questions. I believe I didn't answer two questions there. Let's just cover those two questions as well. One was, how will implementing consent mode impact a company's sales?
Oh, sorry. You want to go, or I can
Yeah,
go?
I can take that one. So it can have a two-side impact, is what I believe. There could be a potential decrease on maybe, let's say, reduced data for the targeting, and can also impact on conversion tracking issues because consent mode might affect the conversion tracking, making it harder to measure the campaign success. That could be one on the downside. But on the increase side, actually, when you have consent mode, you actually build a trust and transparency because you respect the user privacy. And you actually focus on the first party data, which can be directly collected with their consent. And once you have the data and you actually make it on improved modeling techniques. So Google and other ad platforms are developing, as we know, advanced modeling techniques, which actually compensates for the missing data due to the consent restrictions, right? So this can help maintain a decent level of conversion, and this can make a very decent level of, it does have an impact, but it has a downside, but it has a potential upside as well. What do you think, Josh? Do you want to add on to something, or do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, like one, it shouldn't affect like the actual sales data that's coming into your system, right? Like into your backend PO system, because that has no effect on cookies or not, right? Those are people who are actually buying things, and those transactions are going to happen. You could affect sales greatly if the cookie banner persists on every single page and you're pissing people off and they leave, right? So you really want to have a good implementation that's not like super duper annoying, and the more UX friendly it is, the better. But you're also like adversely, in a positive way, you're building trust, right, with your customers. And the more trust you have, the more likely somebody's going to be willing to give you information and ultimately purchase something. So on the positive of this, a trust forward company should ultimately result in more sales, right? You just want to be careful of how you've implemented it so that it doesn't distract from, people doing what you want them to do on your website.
Yeah. One last question. Probably I am not missing out on any other questions. Last is, how much traffic do we need to get the modeling to work properly? Yeah, do you want to take that?
It's a little unclear. I mean, Google said like for certain data, like data-driven attribution modeling, etc., like you need at least 600 conversions and 15,000 interactions within a 30-day period of time. There's different requirements. Like for conversion modeling, you need at least 1,000 conversions per month. So you need a significant amount of data to like leverage some of these modeling capabilities. And it's kind of going to ignore it. But like to actually see if modeling is working or not, you can always turn the different modeling settings for in the user identification on or off to see if that modeling has kicked in or not. If you go between blended and device driven, you should be able to understand if there's modeling that is being or blended and observed, if there's modeling that's being applied. So there's ways to check if it's working or not.
Absolutely. I was just looking at it a couple of days back, and there was a recent article that Google has also probably, if I'll just paste this link, you can just check this article once, and if you feel, you can take some insights from there. So thanks, Josh. Thanks, everyone. This really sums up all the questions. Thank you so much, attendees. It was great interacting with everyone. Thank you so much, Josh. Thanks, everyone, for attending it. Thanks, Josh. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.